attendees. So thanks everyone for coming along. Just to briefly introduce myself, so I'm Peter Cherry, and I'm the new Assistant Director for Ottoman and Contemporary Türkiye at the British Institute at Ankara. And this is actually the first time I've hosted a webinar for the BIA. So if I'm slightly skittish, that is why, to check everything is working. But thank you all very much for coming. And it's my great pleasure well, first of all, to welcome you all for coming and to welcome our speakers today. This is obviously a book launch, as you'll have seen, and it's the latest in the BIA's IB Tauris series, Contemporary Turkey, which the series editor will be talking a little bit about shortly. So let me just introduce, so this is Zühre Emanet, who is an independent scholar, but she holds a PhD from the School of Oriental and African Studies, SOAS, at the University of London. And she has previously worked as a primary school English teacher. So it does mean that her research will have a very particular kind of autobiographical edge, which I'm really looking forward to. And The Politics of Education in Turkey is her first book. And joining her today, so the talk will be chaired by Dr. Ceren Lord, who is currently a British Academy postdoctoral research fellow at the Department of Politics and International Relations. She completed her PhD in 2015 at the London School of Economics, Government and Development. She's previously published on religious politics, secularism, nationalism, minorities, and Turkey, and is currently working on a manuscript on the relationship between conflict and identity. So alongside her academic career, Ceren previously worked in finance as an economist focusing on Europe, the Middle East and Africa. She's associate editor of the British Journal of Middle Eastern Studies and the lead editor of the British Institute at Ankara, so the BIA's Contemporary Turkey series published by IB Tauris, Bloomsbury. So once again, just to say thank you for coming. So throughout the event, please feel free to write any questions in the questions and answers box at the bottom of the screen, and we'll come to them right after the talk. I also want to take this opportunity just to say that the BIA invites you to join us as a member for 2023. Your membership enables the Institute to host online events such as this, as well as entitling you even to many benefits, which you can see in the link, I think, that should be in the chat box right now as well. So you should see that link there. So thanks very much for your attendance today, and Ceren and Zühre, is over to you.
Thank you very much, Peter, and hello everyone. Thank you very much for joining. Before I pass on to Zühre to discuss her politics of education in Turkey based on meticulous research, I would just like to just talk very briefly about the Contemporary Turkey series, which and Zühre's book is the fifth publication from the series. I just want to share my screen with you, if I can find it. Apologies. Yes, okay. Can you see? Can you see the Contemporary Turkey page? Yeah, okay. Okay, so the Contemporary Turkey series is part of a joint initiative of British Institute at Ankara and IB Tauris, which is now part of Bloomsbury. We are, you can see that Zühre's book is, as I mentioned, is one of the latest to be published. And please do, if you're interested in publishing on Contemporary Turkey, please do have a look at the Bloomsbury website or contact me after the talk. Apologies for that. I will just now I just want to say well, Peter has introduced Zühre. She has written an incredibly insight. She provides an unparalleled insight into the Turkish classroom and how it has been transformed under. Oh, sorry, stop sharing. How it has been transformed under the AKP, under the forces of neoliberal and Islamist policies, and she discusses in incredible detail and insightful manner the repercussions that it has on the sort of the culture wars and competing national narratives and gender regimes. I won't say much more on that, and I'll pass on to her, and then hopefully we can have a rich discussion at the end. So with that, I'll pass. Zühre, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. And I have to say that this is a quiet moment for me, and indeed. Since this is my book launch, I would like to thank everyone who made this book possible. First of all, I would like to thank all the teachers, pupils, and mothers once again. They generously shared their ideas, dreams, disappointments, and more about education with me, as well as their pasts and presents. I would like to thank British Institute at Ankara for their support of this series and many nuanced voices. And Sevgi Adak has always been encouraging, and I'm in debt to Ceren Dort, editor of this series. And I would like to thank Yasmin Garcha and Rory Gormley, my editors at Bloomsbury. And I also would like to thank Benjamin Fortna, who is with us today, Professor Benjamin Fortna, who played a role in shaping my research. And I must say that my PhD supervisor, Professor Deniz Kandioti, who is also here with us today, has played a formative role in literally every process of this book. Without her constant presence, this book would not be possible. I would like to share my, sorry. I don't know if I'm sharing my screen with you. Yes. I'm very sorry for this. Okay. Well, since Justice and Development Party came to power, we have been witnessing waves of change in the field of education. One of the key questions regarding these changes has been that whether if we are witnessing the gradual demise of the Republican ideal of secular universal state education, an ideal that was first crystallized in the Law on the Unification of Education, Tevhid-i Tedrisat Kanunu of 1924, which introduced a unified, universal education system regardless of ethnic, religious, and gender differences. There is neither a single nor a simple answer to this far-reaching question in this book, which was originally my doctoral thesis. I aim to provide an answer by outlining the interactions between the consolidation of neoliberalism and Islamization in public primary education. My immersion in the daily life of two primary schools in one of the Istanbul's densely populated districts provided me with a unique perspective to examine the complex nature of these interactions during the 2012-2013 school year. a crucial period in the country's recent education history, I think. In other words, my insight into the answers to the far-reaching question I have posed comes from research that deals with something much more mundane. In other words, I was grounded in 2 schools and the district in which those schools were located. This is significant because neither the study of curricula or legitimate knowledge in textbooks nor policy documents or official discourses of the state can capture this complexity. And my findings suggest that the basic assumptions of the Republic's fundamental education law, Tevhid-i Tedrisat Kanunu, which introduced the foundations of gender equality in education, are being reinterpreted. In the remainder of this lecture, I will briefly discuss some of the key moments and developments that helped me to formulate my research questions. I think this will also contribute to a better understanding of the context, especially for those who are not too familiar with the field of primary education. Then I will give you a brief description of my methods. I will talk about some of the most important features of 2 schools and the district in which these schools were situated. In the last part, I will focus on the 3 main themes of this book and explain some of my main arguments with selected examples. First part, okay. Since I do not want to run the risk of turning the entire ebbs and flows of almost 100 years of history into a kind of caricature in this lecture, I have decided to focus on the period of the Justice and Development Party and share with you my thought process that has evolved in parallel with the waves of change in primary education, and how these have led me to formulate the key questions of this study. Looking back, I believe the seed of my interest in this subject took root when I was working as a teacher in primary school, where I had a permanent teaching position as an English teacher, especially after the launch of the Hey Girls, Let's Go to School, Haydi Kızlar Okula kampanyası, which drew attention to the importance of girls' education. The Hey Girls, Let's Go to School campaign was launched in 2003 after the then Minister of Education, Hüseyin Çelik, declared girls' education as one of the top priorities of the Minister of National Education. This was in response to the UNICEF report, which estimated that about 800,000 children aged 6, 14, and 14 in the country were not in school. Hey Girls, Let's Go to School provided an opportunity for the newly elected government to show its commitment to the institutions of global governance in its first term, which I will discuss later. I was among the teachers who participated in this massive campaign, which initially started in a number of provinces and cities across the country. I diligently visited various households in the vicinity of the public primary school where I worked, and yet I was not aware that at the time I was actively contributing to the global effort to achieve universal primary education, a goal that was set as the second Millennium Development Goal in the early years of the 2000s. The Hey Girls, Let's Go to School initiative, which documented the problems preventing girls from attending the school, had an impact on raising awareness in society and enabled thousands of girls in the country to access schools. But access to education was only half the story. The main challenge in understanding the policy nexus of education and primary education in particular is to capture the interactions between the reforms and frameworks introduced by international actors and the way these are harmonized or interpreted at the national level. I first became aware of this very important aspect of education policy when I did my master's degree in London in the late 2000s. In particular, the course on gender and development helped me to better understand the field of education. At the time, in the 2000s, the Millennium Development Goals were a hot topic. The literature pointed out that two parallel discourses on state primary education exist worldwide. On the one hand, global actors emphasized the importance of education by promoting the ideal of universal, free, and compulsory primary education for boys and girls. The Millennium Development Goals embody this view. And on the other hand, state primary education worldwide struggles with neoliberal reforms aimed at decentralization, privatization, and deregulation of education provision. In other words, while the initiative has successfully addressed access to primary education and the universal ideal of equality, it has not addressed broader education issues, such as the impact of neoliberal education policies and their possible consequences in different localities. Here I refer to works of Madeleine Arnault and Elaine Unterhalter. And the context of Turkey was no exception. A wide range of policies were implemented in between 2002 and 2007. These included school-based management, cost-sharing, conditional cash transfers, child-centered pedagogy, a testing system linked to the national curriculum, a free textbook program, which meant relying on, in practice, which meant relying on the private sector to produce textbooks, and steadily increasing privatization. Meanwhile, there was also a move towards policies based on the results of international examinations, such as the Program for International Student Assessment, or as we know, PISA. For example, the construction of literary canon for children, known as 100 Essential Works, to use temel eser. These early attempts were only the beginning of what was to develop into a transformation of almost every aspect of education system. In the early years of my PhD studies, I was keen to understand how these policies shaped everyday school life in public primary schools. However, the inclusion of the question of Islamization in my preliminary research questions was in line with developments which took place between 2007 and 2012, when the government's alliance with the Gülen community, a market-oriented Islamic community led by Fethullah Gülen, became visible. This was significant because the Gülen community was then a huge political and economic power with long-term educational goals, such as the idea of raising a golden generation of pious and technically competent youth, the ability to influence national education policy. For example, the controversial debates over for-profit tutorial schools, as we know, Dershane, and the communities claim that they leveled educational inequalities. And the market share in education, again, publishing companies producing textbooks for the Ministry of National Education, and a huge number of for-profit private schools across the country can be given as an example. Significantly, these two powers did not share the same worldview, nor did they have the same experience and knowledge of education. The Gülen community had a sustained involvement in both private and public education sectors, with expertise ranging from pedagogy to curriculum development to teachers. The Justice Development Party, on the other hand, made Imam Hatip schools its specialty and looked at the entire education system from the perspective of these schools. This rare partnership of these actors triggered new, largely ideologically inspired waves of change that had a significant impact on the education landscape. Here, I'm referring to Ergenekon investigation, which started in 2007, and its repercussions in the domain of education, including but not limited to reconfiguration of the composition of civil society and composition of the key decision-making bodies, including the Council of Education, Milli Eğitim Şurası, that informs educational policies by means of making recommendations. They were reconfigured. With regards to composition of civil society, I'm referring to the Kemalist Nationalist Civil Society and its organizations, such as Association for the Support of Modern Life, Çağdaş Yaşamı Destekleme Derneği. We also witnessed many attempts to revise, replace, or eliminate Republican symbols during this time. And in conclusion, when I asked the key question that informed my book, namely how neoliberal education policies combined with Islamization shape education, the well-known 4+4+4 education policy had not yet been introduced. This policy was only introduced in March and implemented right before the 2012-2013 school year. It was just before I landed in Istanbul for my field research. For a researcher, this was a shocking way to learn, wasn't it? Among the other things, one of the most controversial details of this reform was the conversion of 8 years of compulsory primary education into 2 stages, 4 years of primary school and 4 years of lower secondary school. This meant opening up the middle sections of Imam Hatip schools. I was neither interested in the impact of this policy in the content of education in general, nor Imam Hatip schools per se. I was just sure that I wanted to do research in both primary and lower secondary schools, since the abrupt implementation of the policy did not offer time to split these schools. And I have to close this section by saying that after the implementation of 4+4+4, there followed a period of open hostility after a power struggle between Gülen community and Justice Development Party. I mean, particularly since 2012, which led to attempts to eradicate the Gülen community from the education sector, and finally an all-out purge of its cadres and sympathizers after the failed coup of 15th July. And yet this book captured a certain moment in the alignment between the Justice and Development Party and various Islamic actors and its impact on education. In this part, I would like to briefly talk about my ethnographic research. I mean, my setting and methods. My ethnographic research took place during, as I have already mentioned, 2012-2013 school year in Istanbul. I gained access to 2 state primary schools in a district I call Bahçelik. It's a pseudonym. Bahçelik was among the districts that had become the hotbed of national outlook, Milli Görüş, proposed in 1969 by Necmettin Erbakan, the mentor of the first generation of Justice and Development Party leaders, and aimed at reforming society according to Islamic principles. National Outlook developed social municipality approach in Istanbul's districts, which had become overcrowded due to the influx of Anatolian migrants seeking economic opportunities in urban centers. In short, informal and formal networks were mobilized to meet the needs of the inhabitants of any given district. The Justice and Development Party-run municipality in Bahçelik not only inherited the experience of social municipality approach, but also received a wide range of donations and grants, not only from national and international donors, but also from Islamic civil society, businessmen and businesswomen. The public primary schools I have chosen, which I call Zühre and Talip, again pseudonames and made-up names to protect the anonymity of the schools, were located in 2 different neighborhoods of Bahçelik. They represent a collage of different microcosms. Zühre School was one of the leading primary schools in the district. In the past decade, there was no ranking system, and yet the usual indicators of the quality of education in a particular primary school were based on the academic performance of its pupils assessed through the central examinations. The examination results of Year 8 pupils were mainly used as a reference. The majority of the pupils at Zühre came from low-income families. The school's reputation also attracted many lower middle-class parents, but they were in the minority. This is interesting because the address-based registration system requires public primary schools to register those who live in the vicinity of the school. And that is why parents mostly make generous donations to the schools to be able to exercise choice. Talip, on the other hand, was an overcrowded, and almost all the pupils were from low-income households. There was a double shift system, a common practice where pupils were divided into morning and afternoon groups. This was not only because the school building was relatively small, but also because the school was what I call Titan school, with more than 3,000 pupils. In Talip, one of the biggest challenges was that the teachers were divided into factions, organized along the political and ethnic lines. Conflicts among the different factions were fueled by educational policies and by policies touching on the Kurdish question of the time in Turkey. There were also debates over the role of Islamic communities in education. In Zühre, however, there was a kind of degree of unity, and yet what I mean is there was a kind of alliance, and we can speak of existence of commonalities, such as disbelief in free education. The majority of teachers at Zühre were either followers of a wide range of Islamic communities, or they were supporters of Justice and Development Party or right-wing political parties. To be more specific, for example, 10 out of 16 teachers who taught years 5 to 8 in the school owed their past education and even their teaching careers to one of the influential Islamic communities in the country, namely various offshoots of Naqshbandi Tariqa orders and offshoot of Qadiri Tariqa order and Nurju movements. While I worked as a contracted temporary teacher in Zinnur, I paid visits to Talib for 1.5 days every week during the entire school year. With a degree from Faculty of Education and 5 years of teaching experience as regular staff during the early years of 2000s, I earned the credibility and confidence to act as a teacher, participant, observer. As part of my daily immersion in the activities of schools, I made many interviews. For instance, I conducted 39 interviews with teachers in both schools. However, I was active I just didn't want to go in deep with the details and the numbers of the interviews. However, I was active in almost all key occasions. I attended dinners, picnics, shopping trips, brunches, marriage ceremonies, funerals, and more. During my field work in both schools, I also started to discover the fact that there were several parallel institutional domains, which was important to make sense of both school contexts. And I expanded the scope of my ethnography by including what I call adjunct institutions. This include libraries, education and culture centers run by municipality known as Bilgi-Evi, House of Knowledge. It was a phenomenon across the various districts in Istanbul as well. I also included the for-profit private dormitory of an Islamic community that I named Hidayet Dormitory of Hidayet Community, again, pseudonym. This was because all the boys staying in the dormitory were pupils of Zinnur School. Among the others, I also paid visits to Quran courses provided by Presidency of Religious Affairs, Diyanet İşleri Başkanlığı. To sum up, this book examines lived culture, which according to Raymond Williams is a culture of a particular time and place and fully accessible only to those who live in that time and place in 2 state primary schools based on my ethnographic research conducted in Bahçelik. Now I would like to touch on some of the key arguments of this book. And it is possible to summarize my findings with 3 themes that this book centers around. I selectively share some of my findings as well. In this book, I base my analysis specifically on the interpretation of school-based management policy. School-based management is a complex phenomenon with different implications for different contexts. One of the most well-known aspects of school-based management is the involvement of parents, teachers, and/or the community in decisions affecting the running of the school. In Turkey, this policy was introduced in 2005 through a new law regulation on parent-teacher associations, Okul-Aile Birliği. And the literature on this policy argues that parent-teacher associations have become a de facto instrument for balancing budget deficits in schools and a fundraising mechanism in which parents play a central role, as well as teachers. Both the critical and descriptive approaches to parent-teacher associations emphasize the common argument, namely that there are regional differences and moreover differences from district to district and from school to school. In other words, school budgets are inconsistent across the country, and these associations exacerbate the inequalities. This was no surprise given that the regulation on this policy considers parent-teacher associations to be responsible for generating revenue for the school, many of which do not receive a single penny from the center's budget, as the literature on the policy illustrates. Potentially, such a policy could be described as an opportunity to solve the fiscal crisis in public primary education if these parent-teacher associations were not expected to hand over 20% of the funds collected in cash to the state. There have been several revisions to many aspects of the policy that I will not go into, and yet I think this brief summary seems sufficient to make sense of what is school-based management and how it is interpreted in the context of Turkey. And in the relevant, if we come back to the relevant literature in Turkey, the main argument has centered upon three arguments that say school-based management functioned in financing schools. And the second one is that this management system transformed educational provision by turning state education into quasi-public or quasi-private form. And the last one that, as I already mentioned above, all scholars in the literature agree that school-based management increased already existing inequalities among primary schools. In this book, I aim to enlarge this literature by illustrating how school-based management established local education market and how this market played a role in Islamization of everyday school life. In other words, I looked at political role of school-based management. I cannot go into all the details, but I can talk about three main findings. First of all, in both the Zühre and Talip schools, one of the most important objectives was to balance their budget deficit. This burden was literally placed on the shoulders of parents and teachers to such an extent that without constant fundraising, various income generating activities and money collections, a minimal adequate educational environment was not possible. Although these arguments have already been made, my data suggest that teachers use their resources and networks in ways that reflect their own habitus and social, cultural, and political capital. And parents, especially mothers, or mothers would be right to put it, mothers, on the other hand, are pressed into service with the name sınıf annesi, classroom mother. And secondly, the municipality emerged as one of the crucial players in the local education market. I found that the municipality was perceived as a patron of the local education market. Among the various municipal measures, I could very briefly mention here facilities known as Bilgi-Evi, House of Knowledge, which enter into a kind of symbiotic relationship with the public primary schools, in the sense that their services compensate for the deficits of the public primary schools. Thus, a complex landscape is created in Bahçelik, with, on the one hand, publicly funded primary schools, and on the other hand, again, publicly funded educational facilities, namely Bilgi-Evi. In other words, education as a public good becomes a party benefaction offered through an alternative publicly funded channel. And finally, I mean, the third point or finding that I want to engage with is that the analysis of the local education market in Bahçelik demonstrates the capacity and reach of Islamic communities and their ability to intervene in the formal education sector by illustrating in detail their role in this local education market. The Hidayet community, a pseudonym, alongside others such as Gülen community, is an example of those who seek to meet the needs of pupils who cannot be met in the public school system. In other words, we have seen that the spaces that Islamic communities enter are created by unmet needs of the students. Now I would like to talk about the second theme of this book, which is Islamization. And I ask, which Islam? And there have been two standard approaches to grasping the role of Islam in relation to education so far. One is that confining it to particular sites, such as Imam Hatip schools. The other one is focusing on institutionalized ideology, namely Turkish Islamic synthesis, or offering analysis of its reception in schools, referring at times the content of textbooks. With this book, I aim to expand this literature with what I found in the lived culture of Zinnur and Talib schools. Unlike the studies that focus on institutionalized practices or official content or context of schools, which is customary in existing literature in Turkey, this book illustrates how Islamization infuses the daily lives ideals, imaginations of pupils, mothers, and teachers by piecing together fragments from the lived culture within and around both schools. Of course, implicit Islamic norms also suffuse everyday interactions through the way people sit, share space, avoid one another. For example, female teachers unable to interact freely with fathers. And yet I will touch on this aspect under the title of gender later. If not worked, but inspired by the Raymond Williams concept of structure of feeling, I gave heed to pupils, and I immersed myself in the songs they sing, the posters they designed, the films they watched, various play forms they invented. In short, I'm not referring to solely the cultural products that influence them, but how they communicate with them, even though they seemed at the time idiosyncratic. Search for their source of inspirations led me to discover, among the others, to some of the invented traditions of the Justice and Development Party, namely the day of commemoration of the adoption of the national anthem and Mehmet Akif Ersoy, which observes the day when March of Independence, İstiklal Marşı, was officially adopted as Turkey's national anthem to honor its writer Mehmet Akif Ersoy, and Holy Birth Week, Kutlu Doğum Haftası, that venerates the Prophet Muhammad. These two commemorations were the perfect sites to maximize the pedagogical reach of competing ideals, ideas, symbols of different Islamic actors through circulation in books, songs, museums, and wide range of media. Pupils who were exposed to narratives during the honoring Mehmet Akif Ersoy are enjoined to claim the Gallipoli campaign, Çanakkale Savaşı, as the true liberation war, Mehmet Akif Ersoy as the inspirational spiritual leader, and Islam as the central component of nationhood. It was easy to reach the conclusion that this is narrative of New Turkey, which was crafted and circulated by the Justice and Development Party-run municipality in Bahçelik. However, this seamless narrative was shattered by diverse claims on Ümmet by various Islamic communities and actors. In order to illustrate my point, I engaged with songs or hymns, as pupils call. They sang, the pupils sang during the Holy Birth Week and focused on some of them that give reference to commitment to Gülen community. These findings, among the others, led me to ask, which Islam? As none of the Islamic communities' constituencies had same claim on nation or overarching. In this last section, I mean, not last theme, last part of my, nice, in this last section, I will touch on some of my findings with regards to de facto gender segregation and gender regime of schools. And first of all, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm with you. It is possible to trace different forms and varying degrees of gender segregation inside and outside the school settings, although public schools are co-educational and there are no legal restrictions to mixed sex socializing. Islamic communities and organizations often implement separation de facto. Such socialization practices imply a tacit recognition of imagined separate spheres, even if their realization cannot be fully implemented in the co-ed school settings. In other words, pupils are encouraged to follow the gender segregation rules that operate within the boundaries of these institutions. Even the teachers' common rooms reflect implicit rules of avoidance, such as using different spaces for male and female teachers. And with regards to gender regime of schools, I repeatedly observed that parental roles and the femininities and masculinities attached to them are routinely performed in the school context by teachers. These daily practices were further bolstered by two dominant stereotypes, that of the male as a father who is violent, distant, authoritative, and the female as a compassionate but passive, nurturing mother. This dyad constitutes the blueprint of the gender regime of both schools, although teachers are consistently critical of men's deficiencies as parents and condemn the use of actual or threatened violence. They mimic those roles in classroom and freely employ familial metaphors to describe their relations to their pupils. These performances not only reproduce idealized femininities and masculinities, but also define gender regime of the school. Normative expectations attached to this gender regime are in line with the local and national social policies that define motherhood in a specific way. Emphasized femininity, which is a pious, hardworking, active, engaged motherhood performance, is key not only in the district but also in the schools. Mothers or female teachers who do not conform to these norms are considered deviant. Motherhood and marriage are the key points of reference for idealized femininity among teachers. Those who fall foul of this norm by being single, divorced, or single mothers are the bearers of marginalized or deviant identities, needing correction, by becoming the target of social pressures to marry or remarry. While appearing seemingly critical of the parental non-involvement of fathers and their resort to actual or threatened violence, this violence is normalized, and this violence is normalized by being assimilated into masculine gender norms and becomes an expression of hegemonic masculinity. These findings that I selectively touch on, but the number of the cases and examples were extensive, so I just selected a few in this lecture. And to conclude, I think these findings that offer us a localized glimpse of the dynamics at work in primary education can only lead the way to what should become a sustained program of research into education at all levels in Turkey. Research that is currently mainly limited to the level of formal policies. My work will have achieved its purpose if it offers some pointers to the complexity of the task at hand.